Our U.S. business correspondent is waiting to discuss markets opening and the latest business news making headlines in the United States. Hi, Caroline. It's good to see you. So the U.S. and China met over the weekend. What more did we learn about the progress with trade talks?
Well, we learned that tensions between the U.S. and China are still very high. Differences between the world's two biggest economies were on full display at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC summit in Papua New Guinea over the weekend. In fact, leaders failed for the first time in its history. Wow. President Trump was not in attendance, but U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was, as was Chinese President Xi Jinping. And in a rather blunt speech, Vice President Pence said there would be no end to U.S. tariffs on $250 billion of Chinese goods until China changed its ways. A pretty worrying prospect for China, which of course is heavily reliant on exports. He also called for nations to avoid loans that would leave them indebted to Beijing. Now, before heading home, Pence listed the U.S.'s differences with China to reporters, saying they begin with trade practices, with tariffs and quotas, forced technology transfers, the theft of intellectual property. He says it even goes beyond that, though, to freedom of navigation in the seas, concerns about human rights, and so on. So investors and world leaders alike will be paying close attention to that upcoming meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi in Argentina, looking for any clues as to what's next. That G20 meeting of the world's developed economies takes place in Buenos Aires from November 30th to December 1st, and Trump and Xi are expected to meet on the sidelines. I have seen some analysts say these talks or these comments from Pence have diminished hope that the U.S. and China will come to an agreement anytime soon, and that if there are positive headlines out of G20, they could be more likely an effort to cool tensions, so maybe a symbolic move rather than actual substantial changes. Of course, we'll keep you posted on any progress.
Well, Caroline, I have to agree with analysts. There's so many on the U.S.'s list that has issues with China, and I don't see this tension simmering down anytime soon. But it's been almost 2 weeks since the U.S. midterm elections, and the results are still coming out. Who are the winners, Caroline?
Well, it was a big Republican win for the state of Florida. Democratic Senator Bill Nelson conceded the Senate race to Republican Governor Rick Scott yesterday after a statewide recount. Also, Democrat Andrew Gillum, who had sought to become Florida's first black governor, he conceded on Saturday after a recount showed he had no way of catching his Republican rival, Ron DeSantis, who, of course, is an ally of President Trump. Now in Georgia, Democrat Stacey Abrams has recognized Georgia Secretary of State Brian Kemp as the winner of the state's election for governor, but she didn't actually concede. Instead, she told CNN in an interview that Kemp will be the legal governor, but not necessarily a legitimate one. Wow. Now in California, Democrats picked up a bunch of House seats over the weekend as well. The races for 3 House seats remain undecided there in Texas, Georgia, and Utah, though GOP candidates are in the lead for each one. So still, as you said, almost nearly 2 weeks later, and we still don't have all of the results in.
Well, Caroline, I wanted to check in with you about, of course, a story that we've talked about continuous times. These wildfires plaguing Northern California, are they any closer to being put out?
It unfortunately looks like it's going to be another week of devastation in California. As of late last night, the Camp Fire had burned 150,000 acres and was 65% contained. The state's Forestry and Fire Protection Agency, which is called CAL FIRE, says the blaze likely won't be fully contained until November 30th, so the end of next week. The so-called Camp Fire in Northern California has been burning for some 10 days. It's already the most destructive and deadliest wildfire on record. It has resulted in at least 77 deaths and destroyed thousands of structures. Nearly 1,000 people are still unaccounted for. So officials fear that death toll could keep rising. Now, I will say that rescuers are preparing for rain this week, so those predicted downpours could help put the blazes out. However, unfortunately, they could also complicate recovery efforts. They could wash away fragments of bone or turn all of that loose, dry ash into a thick paste that could frustrate the search. Now, as for the Woolsey fire in Southern California, that's still wreaking havoc as well. However, as of last night, it was 88% contained. At least 3 people have died in that fire, and 96,000 acres have been torched, according to CAL FIRE. So the destruction and devastation continues, but seems like the Woolsey fire is nearing an end. So hopefully people can get back and start rebuilding soon.
Thank you for that update, Caroline. Looking at the footage here, it's unbelievable. Taking a look at the markets, though, stocks posted sharply weekly losses last week. How is Wall Street poised to kick off today?
Well, so far it looks like more red arrows are in our future. Futures are pointing to a lower open, although right now the losses are looking pretty modest. The Dow is down. Dow futures are down 0.2%. NASDAQ futures down about 0.4%, and S&P futures down about 0.3%. So red arrows, though they're modest at this time. Now, stocks ended Friday's session mixed. The Dow added 0.5%, the S&P rose 0.2, and the NASDAQ ended a modest 0.1% lower as chip makers weighed heavily on the index. As for what's on my radar today, Apple is still very much on there. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Apple has cut production orders in recent weeks for all 3 iPhone models that it launched in September. According to the paper, lower than expected demand. And also, Apple's decision to offer more models has made it more difficult to anticipate the number of components and handsets the company needs. Apple, of course, shocked investors a few weeks ago with a lower than expected sales forecast for the Christmas quarter, which we know is key, which prompted certain suppliers to issue warnings that pointed to weakness in new iPhone sales. So not a huge surprise there. Also, oil, I'll keep an eye on oil prices. Taking a look in early trading, they're basically flat right now. Crude is down about 1/10, and Brent crude, U.S. crude is down about 1/10, and Brent crude is basically unchanged. They, of course, sunk again last week. I think it was the 6th straight week in a row with losses. Earlier today, Iran's president said Iran will continue to export oil despite U.S. sanctions. Washington imposed sanctions on OPEC's 3rd largest crude producer to try and force Tehran to drop its ballistic missile programs, to further curb its nuclear work, and to limit its support for proxy militias from Syria to Lebanon and Yemen. But the Iranian president said, quote, "We will not yield to this pressure, which is part of the psychological war launched against Iran." This was in a speech broadcast live on state television. Rouhani said Washington lacked the necessary international support for its sanctions, and also noted those temporary waivers to 8 major buyers of Iranian oil that it granted. Now, those falling oil prices impact gas prices, and Thanksgiving is this week, and it's a big travel holiday here in the U.S., so many people will be on the roads, and while traffic may be bad, plunging gas prices may be something drivers can be thankful for. On the economic front, New York Fed President John Williams will speak today. There's been some uncertainty recently about the outlook for U.S. interest rates. Federal Reserve policymakers are still signaling rate increases ahead, but have sounded more concerned about a potential global slowdown, leading markets to suspect the tightening cycle may not have much further room to run. We'll see if Williams kind of echoes that same theme. And also, just finally, Bitcoin, it slumped to a new 13-month low today, with the biggest cryptocurrency touching $5,173.23. So wow. Interesting to note there. But taking a look at the futures, we are looking at a modestly lower open, though we still have about 50 minutes to go before the opening bell rings.
Wow. Well, Caroline, the trade tensions are still burning hot. The wildfires haven't shown any sign of slowing down, and the markets are in the red. I'm looking for some more good news here today. So let's look a bit further out. What else is on your radar this week?
Well, I have good news for me. It's a holiday-shortened week because on Thursday, the U.S. markets are closed for the Thanksgiving holiday. So great news for me. I don't know about you, Idia. Volume might be low, especially as the week goes on. So it could be kind of a sluggish week. We'll have to wait and see. Retail will be front and center this week. Not only is the day after Thanksgiving Black Friday, which is the kickoff to the key holiday shopping period. I feel like we've been talking about it forever now.
For a while now.
But we'll also get earnings from several big-name stores. Target reports tomorrow, as does TJX, Kohl's, Gap, Best Buy, and Lowe's. We'll get a read on consumer sentiment on Wednesday. Obviously, the more confident consumers are, the more they'll be spending when they're out shopping. So that has a big impact on the economy. Outside of retailers, we'll also get quarterly results from companies like Campbell's Soup and Deere & Co. Investors will be looking closely at Deere's guidance to get a better sense of the impact from the U.S.-China trade war on the farm economy. And Campbell's Soup, if you may remember, has said that aluminum tariffs will make cans more expensive, so we'll see how much of an impact they've had on the soup maker's bottom line. We'll also get reads on the housing market with housing starts and building permits tomorrow, followed by existing home sales figures on Wednesday. Last week, Home Depot said the pace of U.S. home sales is slowing, so these should provide some more insight there. And then on the political front, we'll be looking for any White House staffing shakeups. In an interview with Fox News yesterday, President Trump implied more could be happening soon. He said he has 3 or 4 or 5 positions that he's thinking about. Of that, he said it might just end up being 2, but the president said he needs flexibility.
Trump definitely knows how to keep staff on their toes, Caroline. But anyway, at least Thanksgiving is something to look forward to. Now, before you go, I'd like to get a check at what's happening with the box office results. So who topped the charts this weekend?
Well, the latest Harry Potter spin-off called Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald easily topped the box office this weekend with a $62 million opening. That being said, that's the lowest opening so far in the entire Harry Potter franchise.
Wow.
Overseas, it did better, pulling in $191 million, so pretty solid there, but underwhelming domestically. Also, I checked the movie review site Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know if you ever go there, but it had a pretty rotten score. Only 40% of critics liked it. The consensus was that it had glimmers of Harry Potter magic, but that the story's spell isn't as strong as earlier movies. Now, last week's #1 movie, The Grinch, held strong in second place, collecting about $38 million, and that Queen biopic is continuing its successful run. Bohemian Rhapsody pulled in about $16 million. Once again, I didn't make it to the movies this weekend. I did think about it, but instead I decorated my Christmas tree and watched Netflix's latest cheesy Christmas love story. Something tells me the critics probably didn't love that one either.
Well, Caroline, I did the same thing this weekend. I was home all weekend watching Netflix. Thank you so much for joining me today. Arise U.S. business correspondent there, Caroline Woods. You're watching the Global Business Report.